Let's talk, and I'm going to lean on some of our Security Plus folks. When I say least privilege, what does that mean to you? Least privilege. What did you learn in your Security Plus studies? Don't all speak at once.
I would think of it as like a security level, so that you don't have everybody in the company having the same amount of authority. You only want people, you want their permissions to basically be the bare minimum of what they need to do their job.
Okay. Very good. I like that explanation. Anyone else?
Yeah, I could add that it's better than that the employee asks you for the permission when it needs to be done something. Then you give all the permissions before the tasks or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Only the permission that you need to do your job.
Okay, Darlene, can you speak up a little bit? You're quite soft.
Oh, okay. I said only the permission that is granted to you to do the job, like your
to do your job.
Yes, only the needed access for your role.
Okay. All right. I think everybody has touched on least privilege in the proper manner, because you said, you know, reducing or only providing access based on what you do. Okay? And the principle of least privilege basically says you only give privilege based on the need to have that privilege. And the reason I tied it in with zero trust, do any of you understand why least privilege and zero trust are on the same slide? Any thoughts on that? Have you discussed zero trust? Have you studied about zero trust?
Yeah, as a cybersecurity professional, you couldn't trust anyone without a, I don't know, instruction or paper or some base you need to have.
Okay. All right. Good start. So let's do a little bit of discussion here. So we're going to start with the principle of least privilege, is what it's called, PLP. It is in your Security Plus study guide. And just so you know, when we went from 601 to 701, zero trust became from a single line to about 9 lines that you need to know. That's why I'm covering it here. Zero trust is a big deal, but it all starts with the principle of least privilege, which basically says you only have the required access needed to perform a particular activity. And it may not be personal accounts. It could be, for example, let's say you've got a network scanner in the middle of your work group area, and you give that scanner the same permissions as you give certain users. But the scanner doesn't do the same activities that the user does. So why do they have the same level of access? So it's based on a number of things, and you start off by saying the least amount of privilege necessary to do that particular task or activity or project. Least privilege. Start with the minimum, okay? And oh, by the way, that is based on an understanding of what's needed. And that's where zero trust comes in. So let's go to the next slide. We're also when we talk about identity access and management and access controls, we have what's called role-based access control, or RBAC. Have any of you heard of that one?
Yep. All the
Nerman,
time.
talk about RBAC.
Yes. So you're getting access based on your role, based on your job. So, I mean, you can work in IT field. I mean, as you already know, IT is really broad field, but there you will get access only based on your role. Like, so if you do Active Directory, so probably you will have permissions regarding Active Directory, nothing else. So you will not be able to, for example, access some database or do some database configuration or something else. So it's really minimized.
And it's based on your role, which, if you think about it, what happens when your role changes? Your access must also change. And I'll give you a war story about that, but that's something that, hi, Nerman's kid. That's also something that you have to think about. When you talk about least privilege, if you used to have this amount of access because of your role, and then you get a different role, all of the access needs to be re-evaluated and extended to you, or your objects. Let's think about it that way. We talk about I have access, but it's not I myself, it's the account that I use to log in. In our organization, we have what are called normal user accounts, and we have what are called privileged accounts. And they're two different accounts. So here's I have two roles. My role as a member of this organization and my role as an administrator doing something at an elevated level of permissions. So one of the other things, if you notice down here, we talk about segregation of duties. This is very important to understand, because if you are a normal user and you do admin type work that requires elevated permissions, your normal user account probably shouldn't be given those extra permissions. Any thoughts on why that may be the case? Any thoughts? Why would I not want to have everything together in one account?
Because for certain things, you want to give them like access to just read only, and certain things where they can do like modifications.
Okay, that's a possibility, but think about it in terms of risk. If, let's say, my elevated permission, this is very, very important for you guys to understand. My elevated permission account has, let's say, local administrator access on my workstation. All right, I have the ability to do things like install and modify software. Now, for us here at home, that's just standard. But if you're in an organization, those privileges are usually pulled back. And in order to get certain software installed, it has to go through an approval process, and somebody with those elevated permissions has to do the installation. So you, and I'm doing this on purpose, look, watch my hands. You as the user of your computer can't install software. Does that make sense? The elevated permission, and I'm using this as a very specific case, but there are others. The elevated permissions are required to do something like install software. Normal users in an organization shouldn't have the need to install software. So the principle of least privilege says they don't have permission. So when you talk about you have a normal access, you have a normal role and an administrator role, if you are to do your login and passwords only for your elevated permissions, what happens if you visit a malicious website and it downloads things onto your computer? Your elevated permissions have now generated a vulnerability that allows local installation of software that you may not have intended. Because when you go out and browse a website, it's the wild, wild west. All sorts of stuff can come down that you may not see. So the principle of least privilege means that you only have the minimum necessary for your role, and users shouldn't have the role of being able to install software, for example. So also, the reverse of that is, as an administrator or someone with elevated permissions, you shouldn't be out surfing the web. Does that make sense? That's the segregation of duties, where you say, as an administrator, and we sign agreements that say, if I'm using my administrator account, I will not do email. Why? Because if you click on a link in your email, you've opened up permissions that you didn't intend. So I won't surf the web. I won't read email with my administrator account. My user account, sure, I need to surf the web, I need to read email, etc. But if I connect with a bad website, God forbid, if I connect with a bad website, it's not going to install nasty stuff on my computer or to my network drives or whatever. Does that make sense? So that's why the principle of least privilege says you only get the minimum necessary to do your job or your role or your service or your activity. And if you are an administrator, if you have elevated permissions, you don't tie them to your normal user role. You have 2 accounts or 3. I've actually seen one of my people now has 3 accounts. He's got his normal user account, and that's the one where I'm in Teams and we chat. He's in email, he's on this account, he surfs the web on this account, but then he has an Active Directory administrative account where he has local permissions to do things like install software, but then he also has an Azure Active Directory account, which is cloud-based. Our organization still has not gone 100% to Azure, so we've got an infrastructure AD and we've got an Azure AD, and they're not the same. Okay? So he has 3 accounts. Oh, if I'm going to be working with users' accounts, I need to go to Azure. If I'm going to be working on local access to my computer, I need to be on my Active Directory account with the elevated permissions. Does that make sense? It sounds like it's a lot of work, but it's really important. And I think my next slide, when I'm showing this, yeah, I actually downloaded this an hour ago from Carnegie Mellon. They had a YouTube video out there, and I pulled this down. It talks about, have a user account, an administrator account, those sorts of things. It's more granular, and again, minimum for this one and minimum for this one are 2 different levels. And you need to think about that. So giving, and my example, if you look down at the bottom, I call it privilege creep. I was in the enterprise service desk, and then I moved over to configuration management, and I kept my Z account, which was my admin account, was set up for enterprise service desk roles. And after a while, the service desk said, you're not allowed to have that. And they pulled my access. Smart. Very good on their part. I should have also said, you know what? I'm not doing this stuff anymore, so I shouldn't have this access. Because my role in the service desk was different than my role and my permissions and my requirements in configuration management. Privilege creep occurred with me, and I let it happen. Why? Because I still had extra access. Ooh, this is fun. No. If you're responsible for the organization's security, you should be auditing access to make sure that no one has more access in any of their accounts than is required for their role. Okay? Just something to think about. And it's always the minimum. Okay? The minimum access. My role at service desk was at a higher level of access than my role at configuration management, and those were both different than my role as a user in the organization. Any questions before I move on? Is this making sense? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of us think about this and we say, well, I'm on Windows 10 or Windows 11 or Linux, and it's so easy to SUDO and look, I'm an admin, right? But that activity may not work if you're in an organization. Your role determines your level of access, not your operating system. And a lot of users, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, for me it's hard
sorry for interrupting you.
to comprehend for now. How can you use one machine with 3 accounts, and if you download some, I don't know, malicious software on the machine, and how it will not escape the machine to your, I don't know, privilege account or to your another account? That's so hard for me.
Yep.
No.
Sure. I'll speak, my area of knowledge is Active Directory, okay? So I'll speak about Active Directory. Active Directory is based on objects and permissions, all right? So if you think about everything in Active Directory, even Azure Active Directory, you have objects. In my case, it would be my user account. You have permissions. Let's say, okay, I have my user account, I have my admin user account, and another object in Active Directory is my local computer. Okay, all 3 of those are objects. And then the question within Active Directory is, what level of activities can these 2 objects perform with each other? And here's another object, my Microsoft Exchange email account. My Microsoft Exchange email account is tied to my user account, and my administrative account can't access it due to, in Active Directory, they have what are called group policies. And the group policies dictate that if someone has an elevated privilege account, they cannot access the same things that normal users access, like the email. Okay, so group policies are what you do for that. If you are on a local computer like at home, you need to be running the Pro version of like Windows 11, because Windows 11 Pro allows you to create local accounts on that computer, one of which could be an administrator account, one of which could be a user account. And for example, you restrict access I don't know if you can do it in Windows 11 Pro. Nerman, you're running Pro, you might be able to tell me, but can you restrict permissions to user accounts in Windows 11 Pro?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, you can do it.
at the Active Directory level, which requires domain controllers and schema controllers and all those sorts of things, servers is where the security is maintained. They have group policies, and the group policies dictate what objects have what permissions with what other objects. So if I were to get into my elevated account and try and access my email, it would say you do not have permissions. I'm the same person. I'm like, well, wait a minute, Scotty Ward. This is Scotty Ward privileged and Scotty Ward user. Scotty Ward user gets to email. And oh, by the way, our organization even says Scotty Ward privileged if he attempts to surf the web, it's a security violation. And it reports it to security. Anybody with an elevated permissions account, if they say, oh, gee, I just want to go out and check this, and you're logged in with your admin account, it registers as a security violation. And the SOC team calls you up and says, we're going to replace your computer because you just violated your rules of behavior, which is one of the things that you sign an agreement that says if I've got elevated permissions, I am not going outside the organization. So, Kate, that's the difference between thinking about a local account and thinking about an enterprise account or a domain account. And Windows 10 and Windows 11 fool you into thinking you own everything. If you had a Windows 11 system on your network at work, it wouldn't be able to do the same stuff because they apply group policies down to all the objects, including your computer. Linux is real tough because Linux automatically gives you the capability to do an SU, right? The proper application of security in Linux is you restrict who can get to that SU. Normal Linux users can't do an SU or an SUDO. Okay? That's least privilege. Make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
was a great.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, but zero. Oh, yeah, okay. So now I see that we're going to propose zero trust. Yeah, but zero trust it's not the same as least privilege. Zero trust.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's like basically you have.
Let's talk zero trust. Here's my concept of zero trust, and my concept is a tough one, a very difficult one. Imagine installing Active Directory, let's say, or let's say your Windows 11 computer. You buy a new Windows 11 computer and it says, okay, create an account. And so you create your account when you first sign in. And then it says, what does that account need? Well, wait a minute. Last time I logged in, I had the ability to install software. I had the ability to surf the web. I had the ability to have email. I had the ability to, make new folders within my directories. All of these things. Zero trust basically says no permissions unless it's needed. Needed. So your role begins with nothing at all. No defaults, no standard access. And here's, my worst case scenario. Imagine setting up a firewall. If you guys remember what a firewall is, it basically says you have two different directions that stuff's going to travel through that firewall. So something's going to be either internal to external, external to internal, or what's called bidirectional, right? And then these certain things only go through certain ports. If you remember, let's see, the one I remember is SMTP email is port 25. And then there's FTP, and then there's DNS, and then, all of those things, each one of them has a different port, and the firewall is set up by default to say, when I, put this together, DNS is available. Zero Trust says nothing is available by default. You must demonstrate the need before you authorize access. So imagine, buying a computer from, I don't know, Best Buy, and it comes and it says, okay, what do you need to do? What do you mean, what do I need to do? I need to do normal user stuff. In Zero Trust, that doesn't exist. There's no definition of normal user stuff. You start with what is necessary for this role, what accesses are needed, and oh, by the way, you also, if you notice on the slide, it says verify explicitly. In other words, nothing is assumed. Zero Trust means start at zero access and then verify everything that's needed specific to that role, that object, that activity, that project, or whatever. And look at bullet number 2, use least privilege throughout. But you start at no privilege at all. That's Zero Trust. Did that help, Nerman, a little?
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking that Zero Trust, I just want to say, like, you have to be verified. So basically, when there is a Zero Trust, so it means like you have to use your credentials, whatever you're doing. Like, so you have to be verified. Like, so that's what I was going to say. Like, so basically, you can still have access to something, but you have to be verified. It's not like least privilege where someone set up, like using Active Directory, give you permissions, and you have your permissions, and you don't need to be verified all the time. So
right.
Whatever is there set up for you, you will be able to access. But with Zero Trust, you have to log in. You have to use your credentials. You have to be verified. That's why I was
all the time. That's correct. So, for example, some of us, let's say our Gmail account. If you log in to your Gmail account and you save the password in your password manager, when you go into Gmail, it pops you up immediately into your account. Why? Because I verified my access before. With Zero Trust, you have to verify the access at the beginning of each session explicitly. It's not implied, it's explicit. So the Department of Defense a couple years ago hired a contractor to develop a prototype network environment that embodied all the principles and all the restrictions of Zero Trust. DoD paid a contractor to develop a Zero Trust environment. Does anybody remember when that occurred? Do you remember anything about that? It was through DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They hired a contractor and said, make us a zero trust environment and show us what it looks like. It took that contractor a year to do it, and it cost over $1 million to develop a demonstration prototype zero trust network model. $1 million, and it took a year. Now, think about this. Here we are in 2024, and we are trying to do things, but hey, I want to do them quickly. Doesn't matter. With zero trust, nothing is implied. Like it says, number one, verify explicitly. By the way, this is Microsoft's zero trust model. Okay? Verify explicitly. No access unless you have a demonstrated need and then access is granted. Okay? I know it sounds like a lot, but the federal government is now required to be working toward a zero trust security model in all of our organizations. Our CISO, in fact, is participating in a zero trust symposium or something in the next week or two. Yeah, I may try and get into that and observe it. Our CISO is talking about zero trust in the federal government. So if you think about it, this is the security approach for zero trust. Now, here's the thing. This is a user-based security trust approach. What about objects? Remember I said Active Directory is the object, another object, and how they interact with each other. So when we talk about users, we might also talk about workstations and servers and sessions and storage locations and network segments. Nobody makes it into this network segment unless they have a need to get into this network segment. Everything has to be defined in terms of the need before you grant access. And then number two, it says validate devices. That's the way I think about it. It says validate. I go back to verify. Verify the device, verify the session, verify, the data stream, etc. And then number three, it says intelligently limit their access. What that means is don't, slam the door closed, but if you think about it from a principle standpoint, start with the door closed and then only open what's needed. Does that make sense? Here is your exam objectives in the 701 Security Plus exam. Remember I said back in 601, you had to be able to describe zero trust. Now look, you need to know the control plane, you need to know the data plane, you need to know everything within those and how they're driven and what the various objects are and how they interact. Okay, so zero trust is absolutely going to be in your 701 Security Plus exam. Absolutely. It is way too much of a headlines sort of thing. Now, this is the concept. Turning it into operations is a big deal and takes a lot of work. If you can go to your job interview and say, I understand zero trust, people are going to look at you with a different eye because many people in the organization are still learning about zero trust. they have it in their minds, you know, what the concept is, but how do you turn that into operational, actual pursuing a zero trust security model? Okay. Any questions? Anybody have anything that you want to share about zero trust or what we've learned so far?
It's important to not turn it to the everyday life, the zero trust to each other.
Yeah. In a year or two ago, I pointed out, I said, Windows 10 is the worst operating system in the world. And people were like, what? I said, people who log on automatically have administrative permissions. Why? Because I want to set up a printer. I want to install software. You know, I want to add directories. I want to, you know, whatever. But in a zero trust model, none of that exists. You start with nothing and then build it based on your role and your requirements. Make sense? Zero trust is a big deal.
Yeah, but I meant the personal life, like an everyday personal life.
Yeah. We have way too many permissions on our local computers. That's why, if you think about it, you should consider getting the Pro model of Windows 11, because you can segment the various accounts and have an admin account and have a user account, and you train yourself not to go surf the web with your admin account. You understand that there is a segregation of duties. Remember, we talked about that. Segregation of duties between what you do in your daily life and work and what you need to do to have administrative things go on in your computer, like installing a printer or a scanner or a plotter. Make sense? Fun stuff. This is all helpful for you guys. If you don't, you know, fully comprehend, go back and watch this. Go into YouTube, go into LinkedIn. There are lots of discussions on LinkedIn having to do with zero trust, because a lot of organizations are challenged by it right now, and you will see some of the challenges they have. Everybody says, oh yeah, we're doing this, but how are they doing it? And in many cases, okay, I'll just say, I think many of them are saying, yeah, we're doing zero trust by only using the defaults. But that's not true zero trust. Zero trust begins with no defaults. And then everything is demonstrated based on requirement, based on your role. Okay? I enjoyed this. I love studying this stuff. And please remember, team, whenever you are interested, you can teach us what you've learned. It will help you be able to talk about it when you're in your job interview or when you're on your job, by learning to talk about it here. And everybody learns when we're sharing with each other. Okay, that's all I have. It's the end of our hour. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we will talk later on.
Thanks. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Okay?
See you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.